That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The rain had just stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and distant pine. It was the kind of dawn that clung to the edges of the world, gray and unforgiving, in a forgotten corner of Nevada where the highway stretched like a scar across the desert. Ellie Harper's small house sat on the outskirts of Dustville, a weathered single story with peeling blue paint and a porch light that flickered like a dying heartbeat. She was 28, a single mother scraping by on shifts at the local diner, her days measured in coffee refills and the soft coos of her 3-year-old daughter, Lily. The house was all she had left after her husband walked out 2 years ago, chasing dreams that didn't include them. That morning, Ellie woke to the sound of Lily's laughter from the kitchen, a rare brightness cutting through the quiet. She pulled on her robe, the fabric thin from too many washes, and padded down the hall. The coffee pot gurgled on the counter, steam rising like a fragile promise. Lily was at the table, crayons scattered, drawing wobbly suns on scrap paper. "Mama, look, the sun's smiling today," she said, her voice a melody Ellie clung to in the long nights. Ellie smiled, ruffling her daughter's hair, and poured 2 mugs, one for her, one for the neighbor who sometimes stopped by with a spare egg or a kind word. Next door, the rumble of engines had already stirred. The Iron Reaper's compound sprawled across the adjacent lot, a cluster of low buildings ringed by chain-link fence and the ghosts of old bonfires. 47 strong, they were a brotherhood forged in the fires of forgotten wars and harder roads. Veterans mostly, mechanics, wanderers who called this patch of dust home. Jax Harlan, their unspoken leader, leaned against his Harley in the yard, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. At 45, Jax carried the weight of too many losses, a leg scarred from Afghanistan, a brother buried young, eyes that had seen the world's underbelly and chosen loyalty over everything else. The Reapers weren't saints. Whispers in town painted them as outlaws, shadows who roared through the night. But in the quiet hours, they fixed fences for widows, shared meals with the lonely. Their code simple and ironclad: protect your own. Ellie had always nodded politely when they rode by, their leather vests creaking under the Nevada sun. Jax would tip his head, a silent acknowledgement, but they kept their distance. She knew the stories, the bar fights, the late-night runs, but she'd seen Jax once, kneeling in his yard to help Lily retrieve a lost ball, his massive hands gentle as he handed it back with a gruff smile. "Careful out there, kid," he'd said, and Lily had giggled, unafraid. Ellie wondered about them sometimes, in the dark when sleep wouldn't come, if strength like theirs hid something softer. It started with a crash, sharp and shattering, like glass giving way to fury. Ellie froze in the kitchen, mug halfway to her lips, the coffee spilling hot across her hand. She didn't feel the burn. Lily's eyes widened, crayon dropping to the floor. "Mama?" The word was small, a question laced with fear. Outside, tires screeched on the wet gravel, and then voices, low, urgent, edged with menace. Ellie rushed to the window, heart pounding against her ribs, and saw them. 3 men in black hoodies, faces obscured, kicking in her front door. The wood splintered with a groan, shards scattering like broken promises. One held a crowbar, glinting dully in the morning light. Another clutched a duffel bag, already stuffing in whatever caught his eye. "Stay quiet," Ellie whispered, scooping Lily into her arms. Her mind raced. Call the police? The phone was in the bedroom, too far. Hide. The closet was too small for both of them. The intruders moved fast, rummaging through drawers, their boots thudding like accusations on the creaky floorboards. A muffled curse echoed as one knocked over the lamp, the bulb popping in a spark of finality. Ellie's breath came in shallow bursts. She backed toward the hallway, Lily's tiny hands clutching her neck, warm tears wetting her shoulder. This wasn't random. The town had its share of break-ins, desperate folks hitting the edges where the law lagged. But her? She had nothing worth stealing, just bills and baby clothes. The first bandit rounded the corner, his eyes locking on them like a predator's. He was broad, shadowed, the hood pulling tight across his jaw. "Don't move," he growled, raising the crowbar. Ellie's knees buckled. She pressed Lily behind her, the child's whimpers cutting deeper than any blade. Time slowed. The drip of the faucet, the distant hum of an engine revving, the metallic tang of fear in her throat. She thought of the diner, the way customers averted their eyes when she mentioned being alone. No one comes for people like us, she realized, a bitter truth settling in her chest. But then, from next door, the roar built, a symphony of Harleys igniting, one after another, like thunder rolling in from the horizon. Jack straightened in the yard, his rag forgotten, as the crash from Ellie's house carried on the wind. The reapers emerged from their garages and bunks, vests donning like armor, faces hardening into lines of quiet resolve. "Trouble," Jax muttered, his voice low, the word carrying the weight of battles past. He didn't hesitate. None of them did. Engines snarled to life, 47 shadows converging, the ground vibrating under their wheels. The air filled with the scent of exhaust and resolve, a brotherhood awakening not to fight, but to shield. Ellie heard it too, the growl growing, drowning the intruder's threats. The man faltered, crowbar dipping, his gaze flicking to the window where silhouettes multiplied like avenging spirits. "What the hell?" he started, but Jax's bike led the charge, bursting through the shared fence with a spray of wood and dust. The reapers fanned out, a wall of leather and steel, engines idling like restrained beasts. Jax dismounted first, his boots hitting the ground with purpose, eyes locking on the open door. No shouts, no guns, just presence, heavy and unyielding. The bandit backed away, his accomplices freezing mid-rummage. Ellie's hand trembled as she held Lily close, the child's face buried in her chest. In that suspended moment, as the rain began again in soft patters on the roof, Jack stepped over the threshold, his voice steady as the desert wind. "You picked the wrong door." It wasn't a threat. It was a fact, laced with the compassion of men who knew what it meant to be cornered. The intruders scattered like smoke, duffel abandoned, vanishing into the gray morning. But as the dust settled, Ellie met Jax's eyes across the wreckage. There was no triumph there, only a quiet sorrow, the kind that spoke of too many mornings like this. Lily peeked out, her fear easing at the sight of the big man who looked like a guardian from her storybooks. The reapers stood watch, silent sentinels, their brotherhood a shield no law could match. In that house, broken but unbroken, something shifted. A thread of loyalty weaving through the cracks, pulling strangers into family. The road ahead would test it, but for now, the engines hummed low, a lullaby of protection in the fading rain. The silence that followed was thicker than the rain-slicked air, broken only by the soft tick of cooling engines and the distant drip from Ellie's splintered doorframe. Jack stood there in the wreckage of the living room, his broad frame filling the space like a sentinel oak, unmoving as the last echoes of fleeing footsteps faded into the desert haze. The duffel bag lay abandoned on the floor, its contents spilling out. Ellie's meager jewelry box, a few crumpled bills from her tip jar, Lily's favorite stuffed bear with one ear half torn. He didn't touch it. Instead, his eyes, shadowed under the brim of his worn cap, scanned the room with the quiet assessment of a man who'd walked through worse storms. Ellie clutched Lily tighter, her back pressed against the hallway wall, the child's small body a warm anchor against the chill creeping in from the open door. Her robe hung loose, coffee stains blooming dark on the fabric like unspoken regrets. She should have been screaming, calling for help, but the words stuck in her throat. tangled with a gratitude she wasn't ready to name. The Reapers lingered outside, their bikes forming a ragged semicircle, vests patched with faded insignias, the Iron Reaper's emblem, a stylized hawk clutching a wrench, glinting dully in the weak morning light. They didn't crowd in. That wasn't their way. Respect for space, even in chaos, was etched into their code like the scars on their knuckles. One of them, a wiry man named Tomas with a salt and pepper beard and a limp from some long-ago rodeo accident, stepped forward first. He was the mechanic of the group, hands perpetually stained with oil, the kind of quiet fixer who could mend a carburetor or a shattered fence with equal patience. "Ma'am," he said, voice gravelly but soft, pulling a bandana from his pocket to dab at the blood trickling from a cut on Ellie's forehead. She hadn't even noticed it, the adrenaline masking the sting. "You and the little one all right? We heard the crash from the yard." Didn't sound right. Ellie nodded, her throat tight, Lily's fingers twisting in her hair. They just came in, like animals." The words escaped in a whisper, raw and trembling. She glanced at Jax, who hadn't spoken since his warning at the door. He knelt slowly, his scarred knee protesting with a faint creak, and picked up the bear, brushing dust from its fur before holding it out to Lily. The girl hesitated, peeking from behind her mother's leg, then reached out with a tentative hand. Jax's fingers dwarfed hers, but his touch was feather-light, as if handling fragile glass. "He's still got his smile," Jax murmured, the first crack in his stoic facade, a ghost of warmth in his eyes that spoke of his own lost mornings with a child who never came home. Outside, the neighborhood stirred like a hive prodded too soon. Dustville wasn't much, a scatter of trailers and clapboard houses hugging the highway, where truckers stopped for gas and locals nursed grudges over lukewarm beer. Old Mrs. Hargrove from across the street peered through her lace curtains, phone already in hand, dialing the sheriff with tales of those biker thugs causing trouble again. The whispers would spread by noon, the Reapers starting fights, terrorizing a single mom, their engines a roar of menace rather than mercy. Ellie knew it. She'd heard the judgments at the diner, waitresses clucking about the outlaws next door, while refilling endless cups of black coffee for the same folks who crossed the street to avoid them. Jax rose, his shadow stretching long across the cluttered floor, and turned to his brothers. "Tomas, check the perimeter. See if they left tracks." Tomas nodded, vanishing into the yard with a couple others, their boots crunching gravel like muffled judgments. The rest stayed put, a living barrier against the curious eyes now dotting the windows. Jax's gaze returned to Ellie, steady but not prying. "Sheriff's on his way, but he moves slow out here. We'll board that door till then. Name's Jax. We keep an eye on things." She swallowed, the metallic taste of fear lingering. "Ellie, this is Lily." Gratitude warred with caution in her chest. These men were enigmas, their leather hides masking stories she could only guess at. Jax had been a Marine once. She'd overheard in passing at the post office. Deployed twice, came back with ghosts in his duffel. The Reapers were his anchor, 47 souls pieced from similar wreckage. Ex-soldiers like him, factory workers laid off in the Rust Belt collapse, drifters who'd found purpose in the hum of engines and the unspoken vow to stand for the overlooked. They ran a small garage on the compound's edge, fixing rigs for locals who paid in cash or favors, but the town saw only the threat, the late-night rides, the bonfires that lit the sky like warnings. As the first patrol car wailed in the distance, faint against the horizon, Ellie felt the weight of it all pressing down. The sheriff, a paunchy man named Ruiz with a mustache like a broom bristle, pulled up with lights flashing, stepping out with the wariness of someone who'd tangled with the Reapers before. "What in God's name happened here?" he barked, eyeing the bikes like they were coiled snakes. Jax met him at the threshold, arms loose at his sides, voice even. "Break in. We heard it, came over, scared 'em off." No embellishment, no bravado, just facts, delivered with the calm of a man who'd faced worse interrogations in sand-swept tents halfway around the world. Ruiz snorted, jotting notes on a pad that looked too small for his hand. "You lot stirring up trouble again? Folks say your engines woke half the block." His eyes flicked to Ellie, softening a fraction. "Ma'am, you press charges? These boys involved?" Ellie shook her head, Lily now clinging to Jax's leg like he'd always been there, the bear tucked under her arm. They saved us," she said, voice gaining strength. The sheriff grunted, unconvinced, but took statements with half-hearted efficiency, the rain picking up again to blur the edges of his skepticism. By midday, the door was patched with plywood from the Reaper's scrap pile, nailed in place by hands that knew the value of solid barriers. The brothers dispersed slowly, engines coughing to life one by one, but not before Jax lingered on the porch, handing Ellie a spare key to the compound gate. "If anything feels off, you come knock. We're not far." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication, not just protection, but an invitation to trust, fragile as the first thaw after winter. Ellie watched them ride out, the convoy a low thunder rolling toward the garage, dust trailing like a veil. Lily waved from the window, her laughter a tentative spark. In the quiet that reclaimed the house, Ellie sank to the couch, the bear in her lap, and let the tears come. Not just from fear, but from the ache of realizing she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. The town would talk, paint the Reapers as villains in their narrow tales, but in the cracks of judgment, truth flickered. Loyalty wasn't loud. It was the steady hum next door, waiting for the call to rise. As the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the yard, Ellie wondered what shadows hid in Jax's eyes, and if the road ahead would demand more than they'd already given. The break-in was over, but the real storm, the one of secrets and silent vows, was just beginning to gather. The afternoon sun slanted low through the half-mended windows, painting the living room in stripes of gold and shadow, as if the light itself were hesitant to enter fully. Ellie sat at the kitchen table, Lily dozing in her lap, the child's thumb tucked against her cheek like a secret kept safe. The plywood door loomed in the corner of her vision, a crude patch that smelled of fresh sawdust and the faint tang of motor oil from the Reaper's hands. She traced the edge of her coffee mug with a fingertip, the porcelain cool now, the spill from earlier dried into a brittle stain. Gratitude twisted inside her, sharp as the cut on her forehead Thomas had cleaned with surprising gentleness, but so did doubt, like roots pushing through cracked earth, unbidden and insistent. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with the low hum of gossip, carried on the wind like dust devils. Mrs. Hargrove had wasted no time. By the time Ellie ventured to the porch with a trash bag of shattered glass, the old woman's voice pierced the air from across the street, shrill and accusatory. "I told you those types bring nothing but trouble. Engines roaring at dawn. Now this, scaring a poor woman half to death." Ellie paused, bag dangling from her hand, the shards tinkling softly like wind chimes made of regret. A cluster of neighbors had gathered, Mr. Patel from the corner store, wiping his hands on his apron. The young couple from the yellow trailer, arms crossed in mirrored suspicion. Their eyes slid over her, not quite meeting, as if the break-in were a contagion she'd invited by living next door to the Reapers. Ellie straightened, forcing words past the lump in her throat. They didn't cause it. They stopped it. But her voice carried no weight against the tide of preconceptions. Patel shook his head, mustache twitching. Heard the sheriff muttering about biker involvement. Always the same story. Leather and trouble. The words landed like pebbles in still water, rippling out to the others, who nodded with the solemnity of those who'd long decided the world fit into neat, fearful boxes. Ellie retreated inside, the door thudding shut behind her, the sound echoing her isolation. Lily stirred, murmuring in her sleep, and Ellie held her closer, the warmth a fragile bulwark against the chill of judgment seeping through the walls. As evening crept in, the sky bruising purple over the desert, Jax returned alone. His bike idled at the curb, a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards, announcing him before his knock did. Ellie opened the door a crack, chain still latched, a habit born of the morning's terror. Jax stood there, helmet under one arm, his face etched with the day's weariness, lines deepening like cracks in sun-baked clay. In his other hand, he held a paper bag, the scent of warm bread and something savory wafting through the gap. "Brought dinner," he said simply, no preamble, his eyes flicking past her to the dim interior. "Tomas whipped up chili from the pot we had going. Enough for you and the kid." She unlatched the chain, stepping aside, the gesture small but seismic in her chest. Lily perked up from the couch, rubbing her eyes, the bear propped beside her like a faithful sentinel. "The big man!" she exclaimed, sliding down and toddling over, unafraid in the way only children could be. Jax knelt again, slower this time, his knee protesting audibly, and let her peer into the bag. "Smells like magic," he rumbled, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, gone before it fully formed. Ellie watched, her heart squeezing at the sight, his massive hand steadying Lily's as she reached for a roll, the gentleness belying the calluses earned from wrenches and wars. They ate in the kitchen, the table a makeshift island amid the disarray. Jax didn't crowd. He sat across, spooning chili with deliberate care, the steam rising between them like a veil. Conversation came in fits, halting as a stalled engine. "Town's talking," Ellie ventured finally, pushing beans around her bowl. "They think you, all of you, had something to do with it." Jax's spoon paused, his gaze lifting to meet hers, steady and unblinking, the weight of unspoken battles in the set of his jaw. "We've heard worse," he replied, voice low, threaded with a weariness that spoke of years deflecting shadows. "Comes with the vest. People see the road rash, forget the reasons we ride." Lily chattered between bites, oblivious, describing her drawing from the morning, the smiling sun now joined by a stick-figure family under its glow. Jax listened, nodding at the right moments, his eyes softening in a way that cracked Ellie's defenses. She saw it then, in the flicker of porch light spilling through the window. The man beneath the leather, the one who carried losses like invisible cargo. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, as Lily yawned and wandered off to her room. "Help like this. We're not your family." Jax set his bowl down, the ceramic scraping softly against wood. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his frame, and for a moment, silence wrapped around them, thick as the night pressing against the panes. "Family's not blood," he said at last, words measured, each one chosen like a stone in a cairn. "It's the ones you stand for when the world's turned its back. Lost my girl young, car accident, 5 years back. Her mom too. Roads take what they want." The confession hung there, raw and unadorned, his eyes distant, fixed on some horizon only he could see. Ellie reached across instinctively, her hand covering his, the touch brief but electric, a bridge over the chasm of shared solitude. Outside, the compound stirred faintly, engines humming in the distance like a watchful heartbeat. But trouble wasn't done with them. As Jax rose to leave, a shadow moved at the edge of the yard. Subtle, a glint of metal under the street lamp, gone before he could pinpoint it. He paused at the door, hand on the frame, the air shifting with unspoken warning. "Lock up tight," he murmured. "And if you hear anything, holler." Ellie nodded, the key he'd given her earlier heavy in her pocket, a talisman against the gathering dark. The next morning brought rain again, pattering against the roof like impatient fingers, washing the dust from the streets but not the unease from Ellie's bones. At the diner, the whispers followed her like exhaust fumes, customers leaning in over their plates, voices dropping as she refilled waters. Heard the bikers roughed up those thieves. Vigilantes. That's what they are. She bit her tongue, the coffee pot trembling in her grip, the moral weight of silence pressing down. To speak would invite more scrutiny. To stay quiet felt like betrayal. By shift's end, as she drove home with Lily's drawings clutched in the passenger seat, she spotted them. A beat-up sedan idling at the highway turnoff, the same hooded figures from her nightmares, eyes tracking her taillights. Pulling into the drive, heart hammering, she glimpsed the Reaper's fence, lights flickering on early in the compound. Jax was there, conferring with Tomas under the awning, their silhouettes a promise of steel-willed compassion. The sedan peeled away, but the threat lingered, a thread pulling tighter. Ellie clutched the key, stepping inside, the door locking with a decisive click. Loyalty, she realized, wasn't just given. It was forged in the quiet decisions, the choice to trust when fear screamed otherwise. As night fell, the rain drumming a steady rhythm, she lay awake listening to the engines next door, their hum a lullaby laced with resolve. The bandits would return, the town would judge. But in the space between, humanity flickered, tough hands offering bread, eyes holding stories of loss, a brotherhood ready to rise. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The rain had eased into a misty veil by midnight, cloaking the desert in a shroud that muffled the world's edges. But sleep evaded Ellie like a shadow she couldn't outrun. She lay in the dim glow of Lily's nightlight, the child's soft breaths a fragile rhythm against the storm of her thoughts. The key from Jax weighed heavy in her palm, cool metal pressed into her skin as if to remind her of the line she'd crossed, trusting strangers with the sharp edges of her life. Outside, the Reaper's compound hummed faintly, engines idling sporadically like restless guardians, their lights piercing the fog in brief, amber flares. Ellie stared at the ceiling cracks, tracing patterns that mirrored the fractures in her resolve. The break-in had shattered more than glass. It had cracked open the isolation she'd built brick by brick since her husband left, leaving her to wonder if safety was just another illusion. Dawn broke gray and sodden, the highway a slick ribbon glistening under overcast skies. Ellie dressed Lily in her raincoat, the yellow fabric too bright for the mood clinging to the house, and they stepped out to the truck. The diner shift waited, a routine anchor in the chaos, but as she turned the key in the ignition, her eyes caught movement. A flicker at the tree line beyond the fence, where the sedan's outline loomed, half hidden by scrub brush. The engine revved once, low and deliberate, before it pulled away, taillights bleeding red into the mist. Ellie's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening, a cold sweat prickling her neck. Not random, she thought, the realization settling like lead in her gut. They knew her routine, her weakness, the single mom with no one to watch her back. She glanced at the compound gate, where Jax's bike stood sentinel, dew beating on its chrome like unshed tears. At the diner, the air hung thick with grease and murmured suspicions, the jukebox crooning a faded country tune about lost highways. Ellie moved through her shift on autopilot, plates clattering, orders called with mechanical precision, but the whispers gnawed at her. "Saw those bikers sniffing around your place again," one regular muttered to another. Fork paused mid-air, eyes sliding her way. "Sheriff oughta run 'em out." She poured coffee with a steady hand, though her pulse thrummed erratic, the steam rising like ghosts of the morning's fear. By the time her break came, the weight pressed heavier. She slipped into the back alley for air, the damp pavement slick under her boots, the scent of rain-soaked dumpsters mingling with her unease. Leaning against the brick wall, she pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over Jax's number. He'd insisted she take it, a quiet exchange the night before amid the chilly's warmth. But calling felt like surrender, admitting the shadows had already won. The confrontation came unannounced, as sudden as a skid on black ice. Ellie returned to her truck after the shift, Lily's daycare pickup looming. when the sedan blocked the diner's lot entrance, doors swinging open like jaws. The three men emerged, hoods pulled low, faces twisted in the harsh fluorescent spill from the neon sign. The leader, the broad one from the break-in, stepped forward, crowbar dangling loose in his grip, a smirk curling his lips like smoke. "Forgot something from your place, sweetheart," he drawled, voice oily with false casualness, his companions flanking him, hands buried in pockets that bulged suspiciously. "That little jewelry box belongs to us now, and maybe a few more trinkets for the trouble your noise-making friends caused." Ellie's back hit the truck door, keys jangling in her fist, the metal biting into her palm. Lily's face flashed in her mind, innocent, trusting, and rage flickered through the fear, hot and unfamiliar. "Get out," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her legs, the rain starting again in fat, cold drops that blurred their outlines. "You don't scare me anymore." It was a lie, bold and brittle, but the words bought her seconds, her free hand fumbling for the phone. The leader laughed, a bark that echoed off the empty lot, advancing with deliberate steps, the crowbar tapping his thigh like a metronome of threat. His eyes gleamed with the thrill of cornered prey, oblivious to the low rumble building from the highway, faint at first, then swelling like an approaching freight. The Reapers arrived as one, a thunderous wave cresting the rise, 47 bikes slicing through the mist, engines roaring in unison, a symphony of loyalty that drowned the rain. Jax led, his face a mask of contained fury, leather vest slick with water, eyes locked on the scene ahead. They didn't surround. They formed a deliberate arc, cutting off escape routes without a word, the vibration humming through the asphalt into Ellie's bones. The bandits faltered, the leader's smirk fading as he spun, crowbar rising instinctively. "Back off, freaks!" he snarled, but his voice cracked, the bravado crumbling under the weight of numbers and resolve. Jax dismounted fluidly, boots splashing in puddles, his presence alone shifting the air, heavy, unyielding, like the desert itself rising. He didn't raise a fist. Instead, he stopped a few paces away, rain tracing rivulets down his scarred cheek, voice cutting clear over the idling growl. "You've got one chance to walk. Take it, and don't look back." It wasn't rage that laced his words, but sorrow, the quiet grief of a man who'd seen too many lines crossed, too many innocents caught in the crossfire. The other Reapers held position, Thomas at Jax's side, his limp forgotten in the moment, hands loose but ready, their silence more potent than any shout. They weren't here for vengeance. They were the barrier, the code made flesh, protecting what the world overlooked. The leader hesitated, eyes darting to his men, the crowbar dipping as reality sank in. Muffled sounds of retreat followed, boots scuffing gravel, the sedan door slamming. Before they peeled out, tires spinning mud in a desperate arc, the lot fell quiet again, save for the patter of rain and the soft sigh of Ellie's exhale. She slid down the truck side, knees weak, the phone slipping from her fingers to clatter on the wet ground. Jax approached slowly, shrugging off his jacket to drape over her shoulders, the leather warm from his body, scented with oil and faint cologne. "You called?" he asked, though she hadn't, his eyes searching hers with that piercing gentleness. Ellie shook her head, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "I was going to." Lily waited inside, safe for now, but the fragility of it all crashed over her, the moral ache of dragging these men into her storm, the guilt of their risk for her sake. Jax knelt, rain pooling around him, and picked up the phone, handing it back with a nod. "Doesn't matter. We're here." In his gaze, she saw the echo of his loss, the daughter he'd buried, fueling this quiet justice. The Reapers dispersed gradually, engines fading into the haze, but Thomas lingered, offering a ride home with a gruff, "No arguments." As they rode, Ellie in the truck trailing the bikes, the compound gate swung open like an embrace, That night, with Lily tucked in and the house secured by additional locks from the garage, Ellie sat on the porch with Jax under the flickering light. The rain drummed a steady cadence on the tin roof, washing away the day's grime, but not the deepening bond. "Why us?" she asked softly, voice barely above the downpour. Jax stared into the dark yard, hands clasped around a steaming mug, the steam curling like unspoken regrets. "Because someone stood for me once, when the world wrote me off. War leaves holes, brotherhood fills them. And you're raising that girl right, deserves better than shadows." His words carried the weight of redemption, a veteran's introspection, revealing the man who'd traded medals for wrenches, finding purpose in the margins. As thunder rumbled distant, Ellie felt the shift, the isolation ebbing, replaced by a tentative warmth. The bandits' threat loomed, retaliation a whisper on the wind. But in the quiet hum of loyalty next door, compassion bloomed, raw and real. Strength, she realized, wasn't in the roar, but in the choice to shield, to forgive the world's judgments, and stand unyielding in the rain. The mist lingered into the following days, a persistent haze that blurred the line between earth and sky, mirroring the uncertainty settling over Ellie's world. Mornings began with the same ritual. Coffee brewing in the dim kitchen, Lily's crayons scratching paper, while Ellie scanned the yard from the window, her eyes drawn inevitably to the reaper's fence. The compound buzzed with subdued activity, engines tuning, hammers striking metal in the garage, voices low and measured, carrying fragments of plans she could only guess at. Jax was a constant now, his bike often parked at the curb during her shifts, a silent vow etched in chrome. But the air felt heavier, charged with the promise of reprisal, as if the desert itself held its breath. Ellie drove to the diner under a sky the color of tarnished silver, the wipers swiping rhythmically against the drizzle, each pass a reminder of the sedan that had vanished into the fog the night before. Lily hummed in the back seat, oblivious, her small world still painted in bright strokes of trust. At the garage drop-off, Thomas waited, his salt and pepper beard damp, a thermos of hot chocolate extended like an offering. "We'll keep an eye," he said, no more words needed, his limp carrying him back to the shadows of the compound. Ellie nodded, throat tight, the gesture a bridge across the widening chasm of her fears. The town watched, of course, curtains twitching, whispers trailing her like exhaust. "That Harley's a bad sign." The mechanic at the gas station had muttered that morning, pumping fuel with deliberate slowness. She drove on, the moral knot in her chest tightening. Silence protected no one, but speaking out invited the storm inside. The diner shift dragged, the clock's hands crawling like fingers over gravel. Customers filtered in, truckers with mud-caked boots and locals nursing hangovers, their conversations a low drone punctuated by the sizzle of bacon and the clink of forks. Ellie moved among them, notepad in hand, but her mind replayed the lot confrontation, the leader's smirk dissolving into panic, Jax's steady gaze cutting through the rain. A new face caught her eye midway through. A wiry man at the counter, nursing black coffee, his hoodie zipped high, eyes flicking to the door every few minutes. He ordered nothing else, just sat, the steam from his mug curling like suspicion. When she refilled it, his fingers brushed hers deliberately, cold and insistent. "Heard you got some noisy neighbors," he said, voice a rasp that scraped her nerves. "Tell 'em to back off our business, or things get messier." The words landed soft, but the threat coiled beneath them, a serpent in the grease-scented air. Ellie's hand trembled on the pot, coffee sloshing over the rim, scalding her skin without pain. She pulled back, heart slamming against her ribs, the diner's hum fading to a distant roar. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, voice even, though fear clawed up her throat. He smirked, sliding a crumpled napkin across the counter, scrawled with a crude sketch of her house, Lily's name underlined in jagged ink. Keep it quiet, or the kid pays. He tossed a few bills and rose, the bell jingling as he slipped out, leaving the napkin like a venomous leaf. Ellie crumpled it in her fist, the paper cutting her palm, a thin line of blood welling like accusation. She retreated to the break room, breath shallow, the walls closing in with the weight of isolation. Calling Jax felt like pulling him deeper into the mire, endangering the fragile peace they'd forged. But doing nothing. That was surrender, a mother's guilt carving hollows in her resolve. By closing time, the rain had thickened to sheets that hammered the roof, turning the parking lot into a shallow sea. Ellie locked the diner door, keys biting into her palm, the napkin discarded in the trash, but its image burned into her mind. The truck's headlights cut feeble paths through the downpour as she pulled out, wipers frantic, the highway a blurred ribbon ahead. Lily's daycare pickup complete. The child chattered about finger paints, her voice a lifeline in the cab's confines. But halfway home, the rearview mirror betrayed her. The sedan's lights, twin demons piercing the storm, closing the gap with predatory intent. Ellie's foot pressed the accelerator, the engine whining in protest, rain blurring the world to smears of gray. "Hold on, baby," she whispered. Lily's eyes widening in the mirror, the first flicker of fear in her innocent gaze. The pursuit escalated on the empty stretch, the sedan bumping her bumper once, twice, metal grinding like teeth. Ellie's pulse thundered, hands slick on the wheel, the moral precipice yawning before her. Swerve into the desert and risk the washout, or lead them straight to the compound and draw the fire to Jax's door. Lily whimpered, clutching her bear, the sound piercing deeper than the storm. In that suspended terror, the Reaper's hum rose from the darkness ahead, a low growl swelling to a chorus, bikes materializing from side roads like specters summoned. Jax's led the pack, weaving through the rain with precision born of shadowed runs, his taillight a beacon in the deluge. They flanked her truck without a word, engines shielding her from the sedan's advance, a rolling fortress of leather and resolve. The bandits veered, tires screeching as they broke off, vanishing into a side trail choked with mesquite. Jax pulled alongside at the compound gate, rain streaming down his face, helmet tucked under his arm. He signaled her to stop, dismounting with a splash, his vest sodden but stance unbowed. Ellie rolled down the window, water beating on the glass, Lily peeking wide-eyed. "They followed," she choked out, the confession spilling like the rain. Jax's eyes darkened, not with anger but a quiet storm, the contained rage of a protector weighing costs. "We saw. Get inside. We'll handle the watch." He didn't press for details. Trust was the currency now, hard-earned and unspoken. Inside the compound's guest bunk, a spare room above the garage, offered without question. Ellie dried Lily with towels that smelled of oil and faint pine, the child's exhaustion pulling her into sleep amid the hum of voices below. Jax joined her later, steam rising from a mug of tea he pressed into her hands, the porcelain warm against the chill. The room was sparse. A cot, a lantern casting golden pools on scarred walls, the rain a relentless tattoo outside. "That napkin," she started, voice breaking, the sketch's malice replaying. Jax listened, his face a map of restrained fury, knuckles whitening around his own mug. "They're pushing because they think we're bluffing," he said, words measured, each laced with the introspection of battles won and lost. "But we don't bluff. Lost too much to let shadows take more." In his gaze, Ellie saw the echo of his daughter, the quiet vow fueling his code, compassion armored in steel. As thunder cracked overhead, the Reapers gathered in the yard below, silhouettes against the lightning's flash, planning in murmurs that carried up like smoke. Ellie lay awake long after, Lily's breath steady beside her, the moral turn crystallizing. Protection demanded action, not just presence. The bandits' retaliation brewed, a confrontation looming beyond the storm, But in the Brotherhood's unyielding circle, redemption stirred, forged in loyalty's fire, where outcasts became kin and strength revealed its tender core. The night deepened, engines idling like heartbeats, a promise etched in the rain-soaked dark. The storm's fury had spent itself by morning, leaving the compound yard a slick mosaic of puddles reflecting the pale dawn light, each one rippling with the faint vibrations of idling engines. Ellie woke to the scent of damp earth and coffee brewing somewhere below. Lily still curled against her side on the narrow cot, the child's breath soft and even, a fragile peace amid the tension coiling through the air. The guest bunk's walls, paneled in rough pine scarred by years of use, pressed close, absorbing the low murmurs from the garage like secrets shared in the half-light. Ellie's hand rested on Lily's hair, fingers threading through the tangles, but her mind raced ahead, to the napkin's scrawled threat, the sedan's taillights vanishing into the night, and the weight of Jax's gaze when she'd confessed it all. Trust had bridged them, but now it demanded more, a stand that could shatter the fragile sanctuary they'd built. Downstairs, the Reapers moved with purposeful quiet, their brotherhood a living machine oiled by shared resolve. Jax stood at the workbench, sleeves rolled to his elbows, wiping a rag over a disassembled carburetor, his scarred knuckles flexing with each pass. The cut on his forearm from some forgotten skirmish wept a thin line of blood, unnoticed, as Thomas relayed the night's watch reports in clipped tones. Sedan's plates traced to a chop shop in Reno, small-time crew, but desperate. Been hitting outskirts for months, fencing what they grab. The words hung heavy, laced with the undercurrent of retaliation brewing. Jax nodded, his jaw set like granite, but his eyes, those storm-gray depths, betrayed the introspection churning beneath. He'd lost his daughter to a careless driver on a rain-slicked road much like this one, the accident a blur of twisted metal and sirens that still echoed in his dreams. Protecting Ellie and Lily wasn't just code. It was atonement, a quiet bid to rewrite the endings fate had stolen. Ellie descended the stairs with Lily in tow, the child's yellow rain boots splashing through shallow pools on the concrete floor, her laughter a tentative spark cutting the gravity. The brothers paused, vests creaking as they straightened, offering nods that spoke volumes. Welcome, without intrusion. Jax turned, rag forgotten in his fist, and handed Lily a small wrench from the bench, its handle wrapped in worn tape. "Fix something today?" he asked, voice gravelly from the sleepless hours, a faint curve softening his mouth as she gripped it like a treasure. Ellie met his eyes over the child's head, the connection electric, charged with unspoken thanks and the ache of her growing reliance. "We can't stay here forever," she said quietly, folding her arms against the chill seeping through the open bay doors. The diner, Lily's routine, but those men, they won't stop. Jax's hand stilled on the bench, the rag twisting in his grip, a small gesture betraying the storm within. "They're counting on that fear to isolate you," he replied, stepping closer, the scent of oil and rain clinging to his shirt. "We've got eyes out. Rico's on the highway, Lena from the old crew scouting the back trails." Lena, a rare woman in their ranks, a former army medic with a prosthetic leg and a stare that could silence a room, had joined years back after her own losses in the Gulf. Her presence underscored the Reapers' mosaic. Not just rough riders, but survivors pieced from war's wreckage, their loyalty a balm for wounds the world ignored. Ellie nodded, her throat tight, the moral conflict twisting like a knife. Leaning on them felt like borrowing strength she hadn't earned, yet pulling away invited the shadows closer. The day unfolded in watchful increments, the compound a fortress of subtle vigilance. Ellie helped in the garage, her hands learning the rhythm of sorting tools, the metallic tang sharp on her tongue, while Lily played under the watchful eyes of the brothers, her crayons now scattered on a tarp amid spark plugs and chains. But tension simmered, building like pressure in a sealed engine. By midday, Rico roared in on his bike, mud flaking from his tires, face grim under the brim of his helmet. Spotted 'em, 2 miles out, circling like vultures. Got a van this time, heavier load. The words rippled through the group, vests shifting as they converged, engines firing in sequence. A low symphony of readiness. Jax's hand found Ellie's shoulder, brief and steadying, his touch warm through her shirt. Stay inside. We've handled worse. The confrontation erupted at dusk, the sun bleeding orange across the desert, as the bandits' van crested the rise, flanked by the sedan, their silhouettes stark against the fading light. They didn't approach the gate. Instead, they idled at the tree line, headlights stabbing the gloom like accusations, a muffled shout carrying on the wind. "Come out, Reapers. This ain't your fight." Jax watched from the fence. Brothers fanned behind him, their presence a wall of restrained power. No charges, no fury, just the quiet weight of numbers, the hum of bikes underscoring their unyielding stand. Ellie peered from the bunk window, heart pounding, Lily's hand in hers, the child's wide eyes reflecting the flickering taillights. The moral suspense clawed at her. These men risked everything for strangers, their compassion a shield forged in silence, while the town beyond would spin tales of biker aggression, blind to the humanity driving it. Jax stepped forward alone, boots crunching gravel, rain from the night before still pooling in divots. The van's door slid open, the leader emerging with 2 others, crowbar in hand, faces twisted in the half-light. "You think your little club scares us?" he snarled, voice cracking with false bravado, the air thick with the scent of exhaust and fear sweat. Jax stopped paces away, arms loose, his voice cutting clear and even. "It's not about scaring. It's about lines you don't cross. That woman and child, they're off limits. Walk now, or we make sure you do." The words weren't a roar, but a measured truth, laced with the sorrow of a veteran who'd seen brothers fall for less, his eyes holding the leaders without flinching. A long stare passed, the desert wind whispering through the scrub, the bandits' resolve fracturing under the Brotherhood's gaze. 47 shadows, unmoving, their loyalty a force as inexorable as the tide. One by one they retreated, the van's engine whining as it backed into the dusk, the sedan following like a wounded animal. The yard fell silent again, save for the soft patter of retreating footsteps and the distant call of a coyote. Jax returned, shoulders easing fractionally, but Ellie saw the toll, the faint tremor in his hand as he gripped the fence, the introspection etching deeper lines around his eyes. Inside, as Lily dozed on the cot, Ellie found him on the porch steps, staring at the horizon where the lights had vanished. "It'll end," he said, unprompted, voice rough with fatigue, but not without cost. She sat beside him, the wood creaking under their weight, her hand brushing his in the dimness, a small act of kindness mirroring the one that had started it all. In that touch, the emotional turn deepened, isolation yielding to connection, the biker's tough exterior cracking to reveal the father mourning still, his protection a bridge to her own redemption. The night deepened, stars pricking the clearing sky like hesitant promises, the compound's lights a warm glow against the encroaching dark. Ellie lay awake, Lily's warmth the anchor, the hum of engines below a lullaby of guarded hope. The bandits' push had escalated, but so had the bond, compassion threading through the tension, loyalty's quiet justice holding firm. Yet in Jax's confession earlier, a deeper truth had stirred. His daughter's accident tied to a similar crew, small-time thieves fleeing a botched job, the unresolved grief fueling his vow. It recontextualized everything, exposing the heart behind the leather, the redemption sought in every stand. As thunder grumbled far off, Ellie closed her eyes, the moral arc bending toward confrontation, where forgiveness and courage would clash in the dawn. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button, It helps the story of Jax Harlan reach more people who still believe in humanity. The dawn light filtered through the compound's chain-link fence like reluctant fingers, casting elongated shadows across the yard, where puddles from the night's drizzle still mirrored the overcast sky. Ellie stood at the bunk window, her breath fogging the glass in shallow bursts, watching as the reapers dispersed after their morning huddle. Engines coughing to life one by one, the low rumble vibrating through the floorboards like a shared pulse. Lily slept on, her small chest rising and falling under the patched quilt, oblivious to the undercurrent of resolve thickening the air. Ellie's hand pressed against the cool pane, fingers splaying as if to reach beyond the barrier, but the gesture faltered. The weight of the past days clung to her like damp leather, a mix of gratitude and guilt that twisted deeper with each passing hour. Jax lingered below, conferring with Thomas near the workbench, their voices a murmur lost to the wind whispering through the scrub. He hadn't slept much, Ellie knew. His eyes, when they'd met hers in the pre-dawn quiet, carried the hollows of old ghosts stirred anew. The revelation from the porch steps replayed in her mind. His daughter Mia, gone at 8 in a crash caused by fleeing thieves, much like the ones circling now. The words had slipped from him unbidden, raw as an exposed wire, his hand clenching the mug until the ceramic cracked faintly under his grip. Couldn't save her, he'd said, voice breaking on the edges, the confession a bridge between their losses, her absent husband, his shattered family, binding them in the silent language of survival. It redefined him in her eyes, peeling back the layers of the stoic leader to reveal a man driven by atonement. His brotherhood not just refuge, but a vow to shield where he'd once failed. The compound felt both sanctuary and cage that morning, its low buildings huddling like wary sentinels against the desert's expanse. Ellie descended with Lily awake now, the child rubbing sleep from her eyes and clutching the wrench Jax had given her, treating it like a talisman. The garage smelled of stale coffee and machine oil, the air heavy with the faint metallic tang of tension. Lena approached first, her prosthetic leg clicking softly on the concrete, a thermos extended with a nod that spoke of quiet solidarity. Hot, strong, keeps the chill out, she said, her voice steady, eyes sharp from years patching wounds in field tents. Ellie accepted it, the warmth seeping through the metal to her chilled fingers, a small kindness that eased the knot in her chest. The reapers moved around them without fuss, Rico tuning a bike's chain with deliberate pulls, his tattooed arms flexing, others sorting scrap, their vests bearing the hawk emblem like badges of unspoken oaths. But the peace fractured by noon, a low growl from the highway announcing intrusion. The Bandits' van appeared first, crawling the perimeter road like a predator testing fences, the sedan trailing at a distance, its windows tinted against prying eyes. No advance this time, just presence, deliberate and taunting, headlights flashing once in broad daylight, a silent challenge that set the yard on edge. Jack straightened from his work, rag dropping to the bench, his posture shifting from mechanic to guardian in an instant. "They're probing," he muttered to Thomas, who nodded, already signaling the others with a subtle hand gesture. The brothers converged without alarm, bikes mounting in fluid sequence, engines idling to form a loose perimeter along the fence. Ellie watched from the bunk doorway, Lily at her side peering curiously, the child's small hand slipping into hers, warm and trusting. The van halted at the tree line, doors remaining shut, but movement stirred inside, shadows shifting, a glint of metal catching the sun like a warning flare. Ellie's pulse quickened, her free hand gripping the doorframe, nails digging into the wood until splinters bit her skin. The moral suspense clawed at her. These men, her unlikely protectors, stood ready to escalate for her sake, their compassion aflame drawing the moths of retribution. She thought of the diner, the life she'd clawed to maintain, now suspended in this web of loyalty and risk. "Mama, why are the cars mad?" Lily asked, voice small, tugging her sleeve. Ellie knelt, pulling her close, the scent of crayons and innocence a shield against the rising dread. They're not, baby, just passing by. Jax didn't ride out. Instead, he walked to the gate. Boots measured on the gravel, his frame silhouetted against the compound's lights. The leader emerged from the van then, hood thrown back to reveal a face scarred by old fights, eyes narrowed in the glare. He didn't shout, but his words carried clear, laced with venom. This ends today, Harlan. Your interference cost us a score in Reno. Cops crawling everywhere now. Hand over the woman, or we burn this dump to the ground. The threat hung in the air, heavy as exhaust, the other bandits fanning out behind him, hands in pockets that sagged with implied menace. Jack stopped at the fence, fingers curling around the chain link, the metal rattling faintly under his grip. A small reaction. But Ellie saw the tremor, the contained rage warring with the code that demanded restraint. You crossed a line first, Jax replied, voice even, threaded with the gravel of exhaustion and grief. Breaking into homes, terrorizing a kid. That's not business. That's cowardice. His eyes held the leader's, unblinking, the long stare stretching like the desert horizon, forcing the man to confront the mirror of his choices. Behind Jax, the Reapers held formation, their silence a judgment louder than engines, a brotherhood of veterans and outcasts, their moral code etched in scars and shared silences, standing where law faltered. The leader shifted, foot scuffing dirt, a flicker of doubt cracking his facade. But he spat to the ground, turning back to the van with a curse that dissolved in the wind. They didn't advance, retreating instead with engines whining into reverse, the vehicles vanishing down the dusty trail. The yard exhaled collectively, bikes powering down one by one, but the relief was fleeting. Jax returned, face drawn, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool air. He found Ellie on the porch steps, Lily now drawing with chalk on the concrete, suns and hawks mingling in white strokes. They're desperate, he said, sinking beside her, elbows on knees, hands clasping as if to steady himself. Pushed into a corner, they'll strike blind. Ellie turned to him, her hand brushing his arm, the touch lingering. A gesture of shared burden, her isolation yielding fully to the warmth of connection. In his proximity, she sensed the deeper truth unfolding. This crew wasn't random. Whispers from Tomas earlier hinted at ties to the accident that took Mia. Old grudges resurfacing like ghosts in the sand. The afternoon wore on in watchful preparation, the garage transforming into a hive of quiet strategy, maps unrolled on benches, routes plotted with grease pencils, the air humming with the soft clink of tools and murmured plans. Ellie contributed where she could, folding blankets for the bunks, her hands steadying with purpose, the emotional turn solidifying. From fearful bystander to part of the circle, her courage blooming in small acts. Lily laughed as Rico showed her how to tighten a bolt, the sound a balm. But Ellie's gaze kept drifting to Jax, watching him pore over a faded photo from his wallet. Mia, smiling gap-toothed on a bike's seat, the image a talisman of his unresolved mourning. As evening fell, the sky bruising to indigo, a lone rider approached from the highway. Lena, returning from Scout, her face pale under the helmet's shadow. She dismounted with a wince, prosthetic adjusting with a soft click, and pulled Jax aside, words low but urgent. They're massing, 5 miles out near the old quarry. More than before, armed for bear. The revelation hit like a gathering storm, redefining the threat. Not just theft, but vendetta, linked to Jax's past. The leader's crew, the remnants of those who'd fled Mia's crash site years ago. Jax's hand trembled on the fence post, knuckles whitening, the quiet sorrow in his eyes cracking open to raw vulnerability. Ellie overheard, stepping forward, her voice firm despite the fear coiling in her gut. Then, we face it together. He met her gaze, the long stare now laced with something deeper. Forgiveness sought and given, the biker's isolation fracturing into redemption's light. The compound lights flickered on, casting warm pools against the encroaching night, engines humming in anticipation. Loyalty's hum filled the air, a promise of justice beyond the law, where compassion's silent strength would meet the storm head-on. In the quiet before the roar, Ellie held Lily close, the moral arc cresting. Courage wasn't absence of fear, but standing in its shadow, family forged in the fire of what was protected. The night air hung thick with the scent of creosote and impending rain, the compound's floodlights carving harsh angles across the yard where the iron reapers assembled like pieces of a shadowed mosaic. Ellie stood at the edge of the porch, Lily's small hand enveloped in hers, the child's chalk drawings now smudged underfoot from the evening's restless pacing. The revelation from Lena's report pulsed in the quiet, a direct link to Jax's past. The Bandits' leader revealed as the getaway driver from Mia's accident, a ghost Jax had buried under years of leather and loyalty. His face, illuminated by the lantern's glow, bore the fracture lines of that truth. Jaw clenched, eyes distant, as if staring down the barrel of an old wound reopened. Ellie squeezed Lily's fingers, her own heart a drumbeat of resolve, the moral precipice sharp under her feet. Retreat, and let shadows claim them, or step into the fire of the Brotherhood's unyielding stand. Jax turned from the group, his boots scraping gravel as he approached, the weight of command etched in the set of his shoulders. The other Reapers fanned out, 47 strong, vests zipped against the chill, engines ticking as they cooled from test runs, a low hum underscoring the silence like a held breath. Tomas adjusted his bandana, limp forgotten in the surge of purpose. Lena checked her sidearm holster with a medic's precision, her prosthetic leg planted firm. "They're coming at midnight," Jax said, voice low, threaded with the gravel of suppressed grief. "Quarry trail, full force, but we meet 'em on our ground." His gaze met Ellie's, holding there, a long stare heavy with the unsaid, the compassion in his eyes cracking the armor of the veteran who'd long mourned alone. "You and Lily stay back. This ends tonight." She nodded, though the pull to stand with them tugged at her core, a mother's fierce instinct mirroring the father's quiet vow. Lily yawned, oblivious, her head lolling against Ellie's leg, the wrench tucked into her pocket like a charm. Ellie knelt, brushing a kiss to the child's forehead, the scent of soap and innocence a fleeting anchor. "Be brave, like the hawks," she whispered, echoing the emblem on the vests that had become their shield. As Jax walked away, his hand grazed her shoulder. Brief, electric, a gesture laden with the emotional turn they'd both felt building. From strangers bound by crisis to kin forged in vulnerability, his redemption intertwined with her courage. The hours stretched taut, the compound a hive of contained motion. Rain began in earnest, pattering on the tin roofs like impatient Morse code, turning the yard to mud that sucked at boots. Ellie retreated inside with Lily, the bunk's walls offering thin solace, the child's soft snores a counterpoint to the rumble of bikes powering up outside. Through the window, she watched Jax confer one last time, his silhouette framed by lightning's flash, the brothers circling him in a ritual of nods and clasped forearms. No speeches, no bravado, just the quiet affirmation of loyalty, hands rough from wrenches and wars pressing together, eyes meeting in silent oaths. The air filled with the smell of wet leather and exhaust, engines revving in staggered waves as they rolled out, taillights stringing red into the storm like blood beads on a chain. The confrontation unfolded miles away, at the quarry's jagged lip, where the desert dropped into a yawning scar of earth and shadow. The bandits arrived first, van and sedan disgorging 8 figures into the downpour, faces hooded, weapons glinting, pipes, chains, the cold gleam of intent. They fanned toward the Reaper's line, the leader at the fore, his scarred face twisted in the headlights' glare, rain sluicing down like accusations. "Harlan!" he bellowed, voice cracking over the thunder, crowbar raised like a scepter of grudge. "You think this fixes your girl's ghost? We ran that night, didn't mean to hit her. But you? You've been chasing shadows ever since." Jax dismounted at the edge, his brothers a wall of steel and resolve behind him, engines idling like restrained thunder. Water streamed from his cap, tracing paths over the scar on his cheek, but he didn't flinch, the revelation hitting like rain on parched ground, confirmation of the unresolved ache that had hollowed him for years. His hand trembled faintly at his side, not from fear, but the raw surge of mourning unleashed, the moral conflict cresting. Vengeance whispered, but compassion, the code that had saved him, held firmer. "It wasn't about fixing," he replied, words steady, carrying over the storm's howl. "It was about stopping the next one. You prey on the edges, where folks like her fight alone. That ends here." The bandits charged then, a ragged surge through the mud, muffled shouts lost to the gale. The reapers met them not with fury, but precision, bodies moving in honed sync, grapples and holds that spoke of barroom wisdom and battlefield restraint. No blades drawn, no lethal blows. Just the thud of falls, the grunt of restraint, signs of struggle swallowed by the rain's roar. Jax faced the leader head-on, their clash a blur of shadows, fists glancing off vests, boots slipping in the slick earth, the crowbar swinging wide but caught in Tomas's grip from the flank. Lena's voice cut sharp, directing holds with a nurse's calm, while Rico pinned another with a wrestler's lock, the air thick with the scent of sweat and wet soil. The leader broke free once, lunging at Jax with wild eyes, but the blow landed soft against the Reaper's wall, Jax's arm barring him like an iron root. "Enough," Jax growled, close enough to see the fear fracture the man's snarl, the long stare between them stripping away hoods and years. "Walk away. For the kid you didn't mean to take. For the one still here." It wasn't forgiveness handed lightly, but a hard-won mercy, born of the Brotherhood's creed. Justice beyond vengeance, protection over payback. The fight ebbed as quickly as it surged, the bandits yielding under the weight of numbers and the quiet inevitability of compassion's stand. Bound by ropes from the garage supplies, they knelt in the mud, the storm washing clean the quarry's dust as sirens wailed distant from Ruiz's patrol car, called anonymously by Lena's scout. Back at the compound, dawn crept in pale and washed out, the rain tapering to a drizzle that beaded on the fence like lingering doubts. The Reapers returned in ones and twos, mud-caked and bruised but unbroken, engines sputtering to silence in the yard. Jax dismounted last, his limp more pronounced, a shallow cut above his eye seeping red into the collar of his shirt. Ellie waited on the porch, Lily stirring inside at the noise, her arms unfolding to pull him into an embrace that defied the chill. Raw, unscripted. The touch speaking of debts repaid in humanity's quiet currency. "It's over," he murmured into her hair, voice rough with exhaustion and release, the tremor in his frame easing as Lily toddled out, wrapping her arms around his leg with a sleepy smile. The sheriff arrived by mid-morning, hauling the bandits away in chains, their glares muted by defeat, the leader's eyes meeting Jax's one final time through the cruiser's window, a nod, grudging, sealing the unspoken truce. The town would whisper still, painting the Reapers as vigilantes in their narrow tales. But Ellie knew the truth now. The heart beneath the roar, the loyalty that mended what law left frayed. Days blurred into routine, the compound's gate left ajar for Lily's visits, Jax's bike often idling at Ellie's curb as shifts ended, small kindnesses weaving them tighter. Shared meals, a hand on a wrench, the slow bloom of forgiveness between outcasts. In the quiet evenings, as engines hummed low and the desert cooled under starlit skies, Jax would sit with Lily on the porch, telling stories of roads less traveled, his voice softening the edges of old grief. Ellie watched, her isolation long faded, replaced by the warmth of family redefined, not by blood, but by the courage to protect when the world turned blind. Strength, she learned, was the silent vow to rise, to shield the vulnerable with a compassion fiercer than any storm. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of the Iron Reaper's stand. See you in the next one.